And so he said, okay. And so I finished the last 2 little bowls, but then Mrs. Mayfair came in, and then Peter says to Mrs. Mayfair, hey, Mrs. Mayfair, is there going to be a problem? There's not going to be any leftover soup. And what do you mean, no leftover soup, Peter? And what do you mean? I made plenty of soup. Mrs. Mayfair walked over and she looked at, what have you done? What's wrong with you? That's not the soup, that's the fish sauce. The fish sauce, Mrs. Mayfair? The fish... Yes, that's the fish sauce. What is wrong with you? Soup is for people. We have gazpacho. It's over there in the refrigerator. The fish sauce is for the fish. I don't get it. What's wrong with you? Hey, Mrs. Mayfair, don't worry about it. Penny and I are going to fix everything. We're going to wash the tomatoes. We're going to wash the cucumbers. We're going to put them back in the bowls. We're going to get the soup. We're going to put it on top of the bowls, and then we're going to get everything's just going to be fine. Don't worry about it. Sure, Mrs. Mayfair, and I'll get the gazpacho. Don't touch the gazpacho. Don't even look at it. Please don't do anything unless you ask me first. Is that clear? Yes, Mrs. Mayfair, I won't touch the gazpacho. Then Peter came over here and he got the bowls and he was washing them and he laid all the bowls out and then he got the tomatoes and he put the tomatoes on and then he got the cucumbers and he put the cucumbers on and then he was just about ready to go get the gazpacho and Mrs. Mayfair said, I have the gazpacho. And she took the gazpacho and she put it on all the bowls and then she left because I could hear Mr. Mayfair out on the patio and he was saying, dear, the salmon's almost ready. And I could hear her growling, oh no! And I went back over here and then Peter and I, we just fixed all the bowls and we put all the dollops of sour cream on it and then Mrs. Mayfair came back and she looked at the bowls and she said, Peter, I think you've washed all the fish sauce off of it. Let me see. And she went and she picked up a bowl. Oh no! What's wrong with you? The bowls are hot. The bowls are supposed to be cold. I chilled the bowls for 2 days. For 2 days, I made the bowls cold. I put them in the refrigerator. I did everything. I worked so hard. What is wrong with you? I don't get it. Why is this happening? This is not fair. This is not fair. She says, this is not fair. This is not fair. War's not fair, Mrs. Mayfair. Leukemia is not fair, Mrs. Mayfair. Starving's not fair, but fish sauce? She's choking over fish sauce like it was a bad blowjob or something. Hey, Mrs. Mayfair, don't worry about it. I got a fantastic idea. I know just how to chill the bowls. Mrs. Mayfair was so upset. She opened up her mouth, but nothing would come out. She was so freaked out. She stepped back and she just looked, and then she just grabbed the bottle of wine, and she went off to the patio, and then I went over here, and Peter was saying, hey, kid, don't worry about it. And I'm saying, Peter, she wants me dead. I'm going home. No, kid. No, don't worry about it. Look, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to wash the bowls. I already got half of them washed. I want you to stick them in that ice bucket there. Don't worry about it. She'll never know. I'm plying her with wine. Don't even worry about it. Okay, Peter? So I went over here and we got the bowls, and Peter had washed half of them. So we laid out all the bowls, and I said, oh no, Peter, wait a minute, I got to stick them in the ice bucket. So I ran back over here and I stuck them in the ice bucket. Then I brought the bowls back over here and we laid them all out. Then we started all over again. And we put in the salmonella tomatoes, and then we put in the cucumbers, and then there was plenty of gazpacho because we hadn't used hardly any of it at all. And we got the gazpacho and we put them on, and then we went and we got the sour cream and we put all that on top of the bowls, and then finally I could hear Peter saying, hey kid, they're done out on the patio now. It's time to serve the soup. Don't worry about it. I'm going to give them some more wine. Okay, great, Peter, that's fine. So all the people, they sat down around the table, and I served the bowls carefully to each guest at the table. And I didn't look at Mrs. Mayfair, and thank God, she didn't look at me either. And then after they were all served, I sort of stepped back, and Peter had fixed a nice little snack, because that's what you do when you're working. You sneak your little snacks on the side. So we were eating and we were watching them. And pretty soon they were done. Yeah, pretty soon they were done. And so then I went over to the table and I picked up all the bowls and I brought them back into the kitchen and I watched Peter and he made one more round of wine. And then Mrs. Mayfair got up and she just looked at everybody and she said, "To my friends from Strasbourg and Paris and London and from Santa Fe." And then another guest got up and said, "Yes, and to Mrs. Mayfair and to the tasty gazpacho." And you should have seen her. She was smiling. Really, I saw her. And then we watched them. And Mr. Mayfair got up and he made a big announcement to everybody. He was going to go and get the salmon. So he went out to the patio to get the salmon. And then I went and got the silver platter because Mrs. Mayfair said, "Whatever you do, make sure that the salmon is served on that elegant silver platter." "Yes, Mrs. Mayfair." So that's what we did. We got the silver platter, we put it out, and then Mr. Mayfair came in with the salmon, and Mrs. Mayfair was sort of wandering around the table, and we plated all the food up, and then Mr. Mayfair went back, and then he put on this wild music. It was like a Wagner opera, and then Mrs. Mayfair got up from the table, and she came into the kitchen, and she just looked. And she said, "That's odd." "Odd, Mrs. Mayfair? That's very odd. What happened to the aluminum foil that was back there on the dessert?" "Aluminum foil, Mrs. Mayfair? I don't know. That's very odd." But then she just staggered back to her table, and I looked at Peter, and I knew Peter had seen me. See, earlier, there was only 4 appetizers left, and so I couldn't find the aluminum foil. I looked everywhere, in all the closets and the drawers, and so finally, I went over to the dessert, and I took the aluminum foil off, because there was nothing else to do, and I put them in the refrigerator. Oh, and now I'm thinking, oh, shit, she's going to come back, and she's going to look in the refrigerator, she's going to see the aluminum foil, she's going to know for sure I did it, and then she's going to get all choked up again, and no, it's not going to be my fault, I'm not going to do this, So I ran over to the refrigerator, I opened it up, I took out the appetizers, and I ate them. That's okay, they weren't that good anyway. And then I took off the aluminum foil, and I stuffed it in my bar bag, and I hid it under the counter, and then I stepped back, and then Peter said, "Okay, now they're just about done the entree, so we better get out there and take all the plates up there." "Oh, yes, Peter," but he was laughing. So we went back over to the table, and so now they're finished with the entree, and we take the bowls, the plates, I mean, and we take them back to the kitchen, and we're watching them again, and then there was this poet. He got up and started reciting Dante's Inferno, and then Mrs. Mayfair made another toast, and finally Peter said, "Look, I think it's time for us to serve the apple Betty." "Okay, Peter." So I went and I got the dessert, and I started to put it out, and Peter said, "Hey, kid, look, why don't you just let me present it to Mrs. Mayfair?" "Okay, Peter, that's a good idea." So Peter took the apple Betty, and you should have seen him. He walked right up to Mrs. Mayfair, and he presented it to her. And she was beaming. You should have seen her. She was so happy. And then I stepped back, and I watched him slice it. And then I went and I got the plates, and I put it in front of each one of the clients. And then I stepped back, and Peter came in, and we watched, and somebody else made another toast. And then pretty soon, they started getting up and leaving. And finally, the dinner was over. I was so glad, and you should have seen inside the kitchen. There was pots and pans and silverware and stuff on the floor, and the counters had to be clean. And so we got started, and then Mrs. Mayfair came into the kitchen with Mr. Mayfair, and Mr. Mayfair looked at Peter, and he said, "Hey, Peter, once again, Mrs. Mayfair has done it, don't you think?" And I was, yes, Mr. Mayfair, yes. And Peter was, "Oh, yes. You know, and that was a fantastic menu, Mr. Mayfair. I think it was the best menu on the Hill this year." And Mrs. Mayfair was really pleased. And she said, "Oh, thank you. I think it was wonderful, wasn't it?" Oh, yes, Mrs. Mayfair. Oh, here you are. Here's your checks. Thank you, Mrs. Mayfair. I think I'll leave now. And Mrs. Mayfair left, and then Peter said to Mr. Mayfair, hey, Mr. Mayfair, hey, why don't you allow Penny and I to clean up? We're going to clean up everything, and we'll show ourselves out, all right? And we'll see you next time. And Mr. Mayfair was very pleased. And yes, thank you, Peter. That's a good idea. And so Mr. Mayfair left, and then Peter and I started cleaning up all the mess, the bowls, the pots, the pans, the silverware, and sweeping the floor and doing the counters. And finally we got done, and we went outside, and I said, Peter, I got a really good idea. The next time we serve, why don't you do the food and I'll do the wine, okay? And Peter, I'm really sorry that I messed up. I'm really sorry. And then Peter just laughed and he said, hey, don't worry about it, kid. You know, Mrs. Mayfair, she should have written down the instructions. That way you don't have to think about it. And besides, it's how it turns out that matters, not how you got there. Oh, okay, Peter, I'll remember that. Besides, look, she gave us a fat tip. Oh, Peter, that's really great. But Peter, I don't think I should take the tip. Here, you keep it, okay? Because I messed up really big. Hey, kid, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Just forget about it. Okay, Peter. And so I started to walk down the driveway, but you know, I couldn't stand it. I had to ask him. I had to. Hey, Peter, tell me something. Have you ever messed up on a job like this? No. Peter, never? You never messed up big time like this? No. Hey, kid, don't worry about it. Because you see, I forget everything as soon as it happens.